3 months ago, I learned of my uncle's passing. We weren't particularly close, but to my surprise, he left me one of his properties in his will. I was touched, but not exactly thrilled. As a new father to twin daughters and juggling a full-time job, the last thing I needed was another responsibility on my plate. To expedite the sale, I decided to temporarily move into the house, located several states away. My job allowed remote work, so I got approval to take a few weeks away from the office. Unfortunately, my wife had to stay behind due to her own work obligations, leaving me to handle things on my own. At first, I treated the trip like a mini vacation. The plan was to get everything sorted out in a week or two, but reality had other ideas. The process dragged on, tangled in paperwork and delays, and after a month, I was still there. Things fell off from the start. Objects seemed to disappear and reappear in odd places. I'd catch glimpses of shadows at the edge of my vision. Time felt slippery. An hour could pass in what seemed like minutes or vice versa. I chalked it all up to stress. Loneliness, perhaps. The house was deathly quiet, save for the occasional visits from the realtor showing the property to prospective buyers. At night, the silence pressed in like a heavy blanket. Just as I thought I was losing my mind, a neighbor came by with an unexpected gift, a golden retriever named Buster. The neighbor was an elderly woman who explained that she had been dog-sitting for my uncle while he was hospitalized. Now that I was living in the house, she felt it only right for me to take the dog. Her kindness was appreciated, though I found it odd when she mentioned my uncle had only passed last week. I didn't correct her, assuming she was mistaken, but something about her words stayed with me. Regardless, I took to Buster immediately. His cheerful presence brightened the gloom, and I began to think he might make a wonderful addition to our family back home, though I wasn't sure how my wife would feel about that idea. But even Buster seemed wary of the house. While he adapted quickly to the new surroundings, he refused to go upstairs. Every time I tried to coax him, he'd whimper and back away, tail between his legs. I shrugged it off, grateful that at least it made it easier to keep an eye on him. That was, until Buster vanished. One moment, Buster was at my feet, eagerly waiting for the treat I was pulling from the jar. The next, he was gone. I blinked, confused. The jar was still in my hand, the lid half closed. I looked around the kitchen. "Buster," I called, my voice sharp in the unnatural silence. Nothing. I searched the entire house, going room by room, calling his name until my throat felt raw. The layout was simple enough. The kitchen connected to the living room, which led to the master bedroom and a small study. From the kitchen, there was also a hallway leading to the dining room and the entrance hall, where the staircase to the second floor loomed. I finally forced myself to go upstairs, even though I felt a strange heaviness in my chest as I ascended. The second floor was laid out with a balcony that overlooked the living room and entrance hall. To the left was a guest room and a game room, and to the right, 2 more guest rooms and a bathroom. I checked everywhere, even the closets, but there was no sign of him. The front and back doors were locked, as were all the windows. Yet, somehow, Buster was gone. I spent the next hour combing the neighborhood, asking the few neighbors I could find if they had seen him. Nothing. I felt a pang of guilt for losing him so soon after taking him in. By the time I returned to the house, I was mentally drafting flyers to print the next morning. As I unlocked the front door, I heard a familiar sound, the frantic scrabbling of paws on hardwood floors. "Buster." I stepped inside, and there he was, bounding out of the kitchen, his tail wagging furiously as if nothing had happened. Relief flooded through me, though it was quickly replaced by confusion. "Where the hell were you?" I muttered, crouching down to scratch his ears. He barked happily, oblivious to my bewilderment. That night, I let him sleep on the bed with me, despite my reservations. I told myself it was just for my own peace of mind, though part of me wondered if I was the one who needed his presence more than he needed mine. The next few days passed in a blur of work. My job demanded constant attention, and I was landing deals left and right. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls from clients, and I often found myself so engrossed in spreadsheets that I lost all sense of time. When I wasn't working, I did my best to give Buster the attention he deserved, though I often caught him staring at the staircase. His ears would perk up and a low growl would rumble in his throat, but when I checked, there was never anything there. I dismissed it as his imagination, or maybe mine. That is, until the banging started. It happened late one night while I was working in the study. The soft glow of my laptop was the only light in the room, and the silence was broken only by the occasional whine from Buster, who lay sprawled at my feet. Suddenly, a sharp bang echoed from upstairs, like a door slamming shut. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Buster shot up, ears pinned back, and bolted out of the study before I could react. For the first time since we moved in, he ran up the stairs willingly. My heart was racing. Every rational part of me wanted to believe it was just the house settling or maybe a draft, despite all the windows being shut. I almost called the police, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear of looking foolish. Instead, I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast iron frying pan from the kitchen, and cautiously followed Buster upstairs. The hallway was bathed in pale moonlight spilling through the windows. At the far end, I saw Buster standing rigid in front of the bathroom door, his tail sticking straight up. The door was wide open. I knew I had closed it earlier. "Buster," my voice came out quieter than I intended. He didn't move. The light switch in the hallway refused to work. Cursing under my breath, I held the frying pan like a shield and crept closer. My eyes strained against the darkness inside the bathroom, but there was nothing to see. No window. No shadows. Just black. "Hello?" I called out, feeling ridiculous. There was no response, but the air felt thick, oppressive, as though the room itself was holding its breath. I took a step inside. My foot landed in something wet. The sticky sensation jolted me. I fumbled for my phone, its dim light barely cutting through the darkness. When I pointed it downward, my breath caught. A dark red puddle spread across the floor. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the phone. My mind raced. Was this some kind of sick prank? An animal? Was someone hurt? Then I noticed something worse. The puddle wasn't just spreading, it was moving. Tendrils of the viscous liquid stretched out across the floor, reaching for me like living veins. Buster barked sharply, snapping me out of my trance. I turned and bolted down the hallway, panicked footsteps echoing in the empty house. Buster followed, his claws clicking against the hardwood. Once downstairs, I slammed the kitchen door shut and leaned against it, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911, but I stopped mid-number. What would I even say? That my dog and I were chased by a puddle? The rational side of me took over. I needed answers. So, I dialed the non-emergency number for the local police and stammered out something about strange noises and possibly a broken pipe. 2 officers arrived within minutes. Their flashlights cut through the shadows as they explored the house, finding nothing amiss. When they checked the bathroom, there was no puddle, just a small stain of muddy brown water, which they chalked up to rusty pipes. They offered a plumber's number and left after a few jokes about me scaring myself. The kitchen landline rang as they walked out the door. It was my wife. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I didn't even realize how much I needed to hear her voice until then. I tried to explain what had happened, but it came out disjointed, frantic. She listened patiently before suggesting I get some rest and promising to check in the next day. But that night, rest was impossible. I sat on the couch, clutching Buster close as he trembled against me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching, waiting. When morning came, I resolved to leave. Whatever was happening here wasn't normal. The next day, I was determined to pack up and leave. I didn't care about the sale or my uncle's wishes anymore. Something was wrong with the house, and I wanted no part of it. But when I went upstairs to grab my suitcase, I froze. There, scrawled across the hallway wall in large, jagged letters, was a single question. "Losing your mind?" The words were smeared in a dark red substance that looked suspiciously like blood. My stomach churned as I backed away, my mind racing with explanations. Had someone broken in? Was it some kind of cruel prank? Buster growled low, his hackles rising as he stood at my side. I called the police again, unable to contain the panic in my voice this time. The same two officers arrived, though their expressions were more skeptical now. When they saw the writing on the wall, their faces hardened. They searched the house more thoroughly this time, checking for signs of a break-in. They found nothing, no unlocked windows, no forced doors, no footprints. They asked if I'd been sleeping well, if I'd been under stress. I could tell they thought I was imagining things, but they didn't say it outright. Still, they agreed to patrol the neighborhood for the night. After they left, I stared at the message, my mind spiraling into darker places. Who would do this? Why? Then I noticed something else, something I hadn't seen before. The writing wasn't just on the wall. It was on the ceiling, faint and barely legible, as though it were fading. Leave him. The words sent a chill down my spine. I had no idea what they meant, but something deep inside told me they weren't meant for me. That evening, I stayed in the living room, refusing to go back upstairs. The landline rang again around midnight, startling me. I snatched it up, desperate for a voice, any voice, to ground me. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling. "Honey, it's me," my wife said. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. Her voice sounded off. "I've been trying to call you all day," she continued, her tone almost scolding. "Why didn't you pick up?" "I've been busy," I replied, my hands tightening around the receiver. "There's something." "You're always busy," she interrupted, her voice sharp now. "Always too busy for us. Too busy for me. Too busy for the girls." "Wait, what?" My heart started pounding. "You're failing, you know," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "As a father, as a husband, as a man." I pulled the receiver away from my ear, staring at it as though it had grown teeth. Her voice continued, now mocking, now laughing, but the words no longer made sense. Buster barked suddenly, his sharp yips cutting through the chaos. The sound jolted me out of my stupor, and I slammed the phone down, cutting off the voice. But the laughter didn't stop. It was coming from the stairs. Buster was already growling at the base of the stairs, his body rigid. The laughter grew louder, echoing through the house. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to move toward the sound. Each step felt heavier than the last as I climbed the staircase. The hallway at the top seemed longer than I remembered, stretching into an impossible distance. I looked over my shoulder, and my stomach dropped. The stairs were gone. Behind me was only more hallway, endless and dimly lit by a light bulb that flickered sporadically. I called out for Buster, but my voice sounded muffled, swallowed by the oppressive air. I turned back to the hall and started running, my footsteps echoing against the hardwood. The walls began to close in, the ceiling lowering as I sprinted forward. My breaths came in shallow gasps as I reached a door at the end of the hall, a door that hadn't been there before. It was painted in a familiar pale blue. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling. The laughter had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the walls. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The door opened into a room that shouldn't have existed. The walls were a patchwork of jagged, broken mirrors, each reflecting fragments of the space, or perhaps of something else entirely. My warped reflection stared back at me from dozens of angles, some faces twisted in fear, others grinning maniacally. The floor was smooth, black like polished obsidian, and faint ripples coursed across its surface as if it were liquid. A dim, sourceless light illuminated the room, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to dance on their own. "Claire," a voice called, pulling me from my trance. I spun around to see a woman standing in the doorway, the same doorway that should have been gone. It was Ella, my neighbor from a few houses down. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled as she clutched a flashlight. "Ella? What are you doing here?" I stammered, my voice echoing unnaturally in the room. "I came to check on you," she said, stepping inside despite the eerie surroundings. "I've been worried ever since you moved in. This house, it's dangerous. How do you know about this?" I demanded, though my relief at seeing another human being was undeniable. Ella didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the room, her expression darkening as her eyes landed on the distorted reflections in the mirrors. "I know more than I should," she admitted. And I've been trying to avoid this place for years. But when I saw your lights on late at night, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Before I could press her further, one of the mirrors cracked. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot, and both of us flinched. "Stay close to me," Ella said, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. The mirrors continued to crack one by one, the sound growing louder, more deafening. Shards of glass floated in the air, spinning like deadly blades. Buster barked frantically, his growls mixing with the growing cacophony. "We need to get out of here," I said, panic rising in my throat. Ella nodded, her grip on the flashlight tightening. "There's a way out, but it won't be easy. This house, it doesn't want to let go of anyone once they're inside." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, but before she could answer, the floor began to ripple beneath us. The reflection of my distorted self stepped forward from the largest remaining mirror, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its burning eyes locked onto me. "You shouldn't have stayed," it rasped, a sinister grin spreading across its face. "Now you're just like the others." Ella stepped between me and the figure, raising the flashlight like a weapon. "Not this time," she said, her voice cold and determined. To my shock, the beam of light from her flashlight wasn't ordinary. It pierced the figure like a blade, causing it to recoil with a guttural scream. "Run!" Ella shouted, and I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed Buster and sprinted toward the faint outline of the door, Ella close behind. We burst through the doorway, landing in the hallway. The door slammed shut behind us, the sound echoing through the house like a thunderclap. I turned to Ella, my chest heaving. "Who are you?" I demanded. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door. "Someone who's been running from this house for a very long time," she said. "And someone who doesn't want to see it take anyone else." We stumbled outside, gasping for air, the chill of the night slicing through the suffocating weight that had surrounded us. The house loomed behind us, its darkened windows staring back like hollow eyes. I held Buster close, his trembling body pressing into mine. Ella stood beside me, her face pale but resolute. "It won't stop," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" I asked, struggling to steady my breathing. "This house, it's alive. It feeds on people, their fears, their regrets." "I've seen it happen before," she said, her gaze fixed on the building. "It took my sister. I've been trying to destroy it ever since." Her words hit me like a blow. "Why didn't you warn me?" "I tried," she said, her voice breaking. "But it doesn't let you leave once you're inside. The moment you set foot in that house, it starts to weave its web." She looked down, guilt shadowing her face. "I thought I could stop it before it got to you." I stared at her, 1,000 questions swirling in my mind, but before I could ask any of them, a loud bang erupted from the house. The front door flew open, and an unnatural wind rushed out, carrying with it a low, guttural growl. The air felt heavy again, pressing down on my chest. "We have to end this," Ella said, gripping my arm. "If we don't, it'll find a way to pull you back." "How?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Ella reached into her bag and pulled out a small, battered journal. "This belonged to my sister," she said, flipping through the pages until she stopped on a sketch of the house. Strange symbols were scrawled across the image, along with notes written in a shaky hand. "There's a ritual," she explained. "It's risky, but it might sever the connection. If it works, the house will collapse in on itself. And if it doesn't?" Ella's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we won't leave alive." My instincts screamed to run, to take Buster and never look back, but something in Ella's eyes held me in place. She wasn't just fighting for me, she was fighting to avenge her sister, to break a cycle that had claimed too many lives. "Tell me what to do," I said. The next hour was a blur of frantic preparation. Ella instructed me to gather items from the house, a shard of mirror, the old key I had found in the study, and a photograph of my uncle that had been left on the mantel. Each trip back inside felt like stepping into a nightmare. The house resisted at every turn, doors slamming shut, walls shifting, shadows crawling toward me. But with Ella's guidance, I managed to return each time. Finally, we stood in the front yard, the items laid out in a crude circle. Ella began to chant, her voice steady despite the growing storm that swirled around us. The house groaned, its structure seeming to shudder in protest. A shape appeared in the doorway, a twisted, shadowy figure that resembled my reflection from the mirror room. It stepped forward, its glowing eyes fixed on me. "You can't escape," it hissed. "You're mine." "No," Ella said firmly, stepping between me and the figure. She held the flashlight again, but this time its beams seemed to burn like fire. "You've taken enough." "Not this time." She handed me the journal, pointing to the final line of the ritual. "Read it," she commanded. My hands shook as I spoke the words aloud, their meaning foreign but heavy with power. The wind howled and the figure screamed, its form beginning to dissolve into black smoke. The house let out a deafening groan, and I felt the ground beneath me tremble. Ella grabbed my hand, pulling me away. "Run," she shouted. We sprinted down the street, the house collapsing behind us in a thunderous roar. I turned just in time to see the roof cave in, the walls folding inward as if being devoured by an unseen force. And then, silence.